So I started making music around 2011. I was 15, so I was in high school. I just sat up the back and instead of paying attention to English, I was just making noises on my laptop. And look where it got me. So if any of you are not paying attention to me and just making noises on your laptop, that's fine. That's your loss. But back then, there were not a lot of good tutorials on how to make sounds, and the sample packs were dismal. They really sucked. So I guess I started doing sound design out of necessity, but I found a love for it over the last, well, gosh, it's been 13 years now, I think. So I wanted to kind of start with, I guess, the first sort of few sounds I learned how to make. I will preface sound design with you're going to make a lot of shit sounds when you make sounds, and that's totally okay. That's actually a good thing. Feedback is not. So yeah, experiment. I'll also say you don't actually have to know what your plugins are doing to make good sounds. I know a lot of really smart people who have no idea what their plugins are doing, and they just make brilliant music. And I'd be like, how did you do that? And they'd be like, oh, I just put this thing on and did the flicking, and then it was like, and it sounds amazing. So yeah, don't feel pressured to like understand everything about your sounds. Just experiment with stuff. I would say what trumps my understanding of the plugins I'm doing, like in terms of knowledge, is my experiential understanding of the plugin. So just like making sounds, throwing stuff on, and having like a tactile relationship with the plugins I put on things. But that being said, learning how your plugins work is really fun. I think it can really enhance the experience. For me, making sounds is not just like filling my ears with noise until something sounds good. I'm playing with like shapes and patterns and math, and it's not like a comprehensive knowing everything and trying to like tick all the boxes, but it's like, what happens if I take this shape and like shave the top off of this? And like sound isn't like there's no top or bottom of sound. Sound is just like air wiggling. So all of these like kind of patterns and things and stuff you learn about your plugins can kind of fortify this like experience you're having, you know, while you're thinking about your sounds. So I'm going to explain like some of the sounds, and like I'm going to try and explain what some of these plugins do, but ultimately at the end of the day, it does not matter if you don't fully understand. Just retain what looks interesting, and I'll throw in some visual stimulus and stuff, some like TikTok on one side kind of shit. No, oscilloscope is more what I'm thinking of, but I'm very ADHD, so I just like say whatever's in my brain when I'm in front of a bunch of people. Cool. All right, so first thing I want to talk about was distortion. This is, if you want to make bass music, pretty much going to be your best friend. That and OTT. I'm sure anyone who's made bass music in the room is good friends with OTT. But yeah, the first thing I learned as a baby was how to make distorted basses, fresh out of the womb. So I'll get some visuals up. Very cool. So first thing I'm going to show you, I'm just going to whack a sine wave into a saturator, and you're going to look at the spectrum. I mean, maybe you won't look at the spectrum. But I'm going to hope that you look at the spectrum. Oh yeah, yeah. I usually use span. I'm just being very like Ableton promotional today. No, I'll get span up. Span's sick. Yeah, if I just distort this sound, also just like raise a hand if it's too loud. I'm like virtually deaf by now, so if something is hurting, it's not going to hurt me. All right. Okay, I've definitely trimmed the range on that a little too much. But you'll see what's happening here. When I drive this into a ceiling, all these harmonics start to appear. So those are overtones. This is a big kind of fundamental of sound design for me. Is effectively when something graduates from being a sine wave to any shape, it has to have harmonics or overtones. And these are all separate frequencies that relate to this fundamental frequency. And it's part of the reason you're able to hear stuff like, you can recognize a piano from like a guitar. It's not the fundamental note, it's all of these harmonics and their relationship to this fundamental note that you're hearing. So I play with that a lot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be pretty dumb about this, which is a good starting block for sound design. Just open up the oscillator. I'll explain these in a sec, but these are basically overtones. I'm just going to draw a bunch of random ones in. Cool, that's fine. And then I'm just going to distort the shit out of it. That's pretty loud. What I realized as a baby was distortion behaves differently depending on the volume of the different frequencies you feed into it. So just to demonstrate the difference here, if I put an EQ after and just sounds pretty cool. Sounds pretty sick actually. If I put that same EQ before the saturator, completely different response. So I started playing with that a lot, where I would just like put a saturator on or a distortion. I was in FL Studio for the first 5 years. And I would just whack an EQ before my saturator or my distortion and just start peaking different frequencies and try to see what sounds cool. Personally, I love boosting the bass. You can never have too much bass. So I'm gonna, that's actually not true. You can definitely have too much bass, but you know. Actually, I'm going to put some more harmonics in the bottom end so I can play with them. Cool. Let's just peak some random frequencies in here. I like that one. I'm going to get really aggressive here and crank this scale up. Turn it down a bit. There we go. That's the honk I was looking for. Cool. Boost the bass. My parents loved this learning curve. They loved hearing this. So I thought that was cool. And then I was like, well, I noticed the change. Anytime I move any of these frequencies, like boost them up or down or change where that bell is, I get a completely different tone. So what if there's a way to just like modulate them before the distortion? And I could, you know, be exhausting and move every EQ point, or I could just find a way to like vary the sound without touching the EQ. A really fun way to do that. I didn't understand how a frequency shifter worked at the time, but I just realized through playing around that if I put a frequency shifter, like basically mix the dry and the wet signal, and then change the shift in any way, I get this like crazy like phasing between the two sounds I'm hearing. Actually, I'll put it on the end so you can hear the effect first. If you know what a notch filter sounds like, you're basically hearing a notch filter. You're hearing this like cut, like sweeping through the spectrum. That sounds pretty fun afterwards, but if I put it before, I mean, I like that sound, but you can laugh at it, but I'm not offended. I love it. So that's a really good way to basically vary the input volume of frequencies. Just a hot tip though, you will need like harmonics for this to work. If I just feed a sine wave into this, I might get a little like volume wiggle, but there's not a lot of frequencies for it to like vary. So having like harmonic content going into your saturation is going to make a big difference. But yeah, that was the first thing I learned, like I said, as a baby, was that I can distort a bass and create a tone by peaking different frequencies into that distortion. And then if I create any sort of movement going into that distortion, it's going to make a cool bass. So that was the starting block, and I'll give you a little look ahead, a little preview to what's coming. Put OTT on stuff. That's what it'll sound like if you put OTT on. I'll talk about OTT a little bit later, hopefully, if I can stay on topic. But what I wanted to delve into next was visuals. So I want to talk about sidechain for a little bit. It is kind of related, but gosh, actually no. Oscilloscopes. Okay, now I'll talk about 808s first. So I got really into like trap music a little later in my journey. I was like a bro step kid. Was anyone here like a bro step kid, like early Skrillex era? Let's go, yeah. That's really consoling. I wasn't expecting so many hands. That's really cool. We should all hang out. But after my sort of Skrillex era, I got into Koan Sound as well. Any Koan Sound fans? Wow, oh my gosh, you guys are really cool. I'm kind of nervous now. What's that? Oh yeah, I did. Yeah, I opened up for Koan Sound. It was pretty cool. No, I was very nervous for that. They're my heroes. But once I kind of had the like bass music phase, still love that stuff, but I got really into trap music, and I was like, trying to emulate 808s. And what I was doing was I would take an 808. I'll just see if I've got a like good example one here amongst all of my trash that I've exported. Okay, that's an 808 technically. I was just looking at on the frequency spectrum and trying to copy the harmonics. So I would like look at this and be like, okay, this is a pretty dense one, but usually there was like 3 or 4 main harmonics. So I'd go and like punch them into operator. I'd be like, okay, let's just do oscillator. Let's make an 808. Because I'm a bass music producer. I'm a genius. I can obviously do trap. It's really easy. But then I'd punch in the harmonics. I'd be like, oh, it's these ones. And I'd get it right, and I'd be like, why doesn't this sound as good as a normal 808? Like, I'm looking at like the spectrum, and I'm like, these are identical. These harmonics are there. It should sound the same, right? But then what I learned was if I look at my sound not on a spectrum but on an oscilloscope, I'm completely creating a different sound. So I feel like actually it'd be easier to demonstrate this if I just do separate oscillators. Cool. So I'll just feed these in. Let's say 1, 3, and 5 for the harmonics I was punching in. My shape just looked completely different for some reason. I was like, why is it I've got the same frequencies going in, and yet for some reason it doesn't stack up and the sound doesn't look the same? And what I realized is that phase between the harmonics is the reason some sounds with the same harmonics sounded chunkier and some didn't, because basically you're stacking all of these sine waves together, and changing the alignment of all those different sine waves just gives you a completely different shape. So I'll show you what I'm doing here. Here's my 3 sine waves. That should not be there. Also, I tend to like rabbit hole. If anyone has any questions or I'm going too quickly, just stick your hand up. Feel free to interrupt me. I will not be embarrassed unless you embarrass me. But yeah, you'll see if I fade these sounds in, I get this shape. But what you can do in operator, if you go to the individual operators, you have this little phase section here. That R is retrigger, which means it always starts from the same spot. If you turn that off, then there'll just be random phase every time. So with those on, every time I trigger the sound, if I move this percentage on any of these operators, the starting phase of that operator is going to change, and you'll see the shape change. This is M Oscilloscope, by the way. This is a free plugin. I highly recommend the Melda Production plugin suite. Super useful. The free plugins bundle, obviously free, and there's a list of stuff. I know last night Cybrain was talking about, like, I don't use any plugins. But I totally, like, I loved his presentation. I thought that was sick. I'm like, if I can get it for free and it does something fun, I'll use. I feel bad for doing that impression. But yeah, recommend the Melda Production suite. It's really useful. I'm going to use a few other tools in that, but you can literally just type in Melda Production free plugins, and there's a bundle. It comes with a plugin manager, so there's like 20 or 30 plugins in this bundle. You can just tick the ones you want and then untick them if you want them to uninstall, so you're not like cluttering your DAW up with hundreds of plugins. But yeah, anyway, back to phase. I started looking at my shapes is the point, and changing the phase, I was like, oh, okay, so there's more to sound than just the harmonic series. There's a relationship that is literally just to do with timing, where all these different harmonics are stacking. So then I started making pretty sick 808s. I won't go down that rabbit hole, but what I learned was that having different visuals to look at your sound is a really good window into learning about your sound. So I don't have Vision 4X, but if I was going to recommend a plugin, it would be Vision 4X. That is a paid plugin. Sorry. I don't have it, so I mean, I'm eating my own words here, but having visuals, super helpful for sound design, especially if you just want to have fun, like just make cool shapes and look at them. But this rabbit hole of like looking at sounds got me into learning a bit more about sidechain. So I'm going to, should I generate a beat or should I, no. Okay, I'll show you this really, what's that?
Can we see that 808 sample through the M oscillator too?
100%. Yeah. I can actually make an 808 that kind of gonna try and emulate an 808. That's how I started learning how to make 808s, is I just like look at the shape and then tweak stuff until it looked like that. But yeah, let's have a gaze. Oh. So I started looking at lots of 808s through oscilloscopes, and that really like educated me on like what was gonna sound good. Like nowadays I can look at a bass, and like sometimes it's not always like this, but there are certain shapes where I'm like, I know that sounds good because the pattern is really visible. One of the sort of constants with good bass is generally like this like rounded top. So like here, a lot of my favorite 808s kind of look like this. This one's like pretty squiggly. There's a lot of stuff going on. I actually might find one of my really cool 808s. Actually, no, like seat warmer. I have really terrible names for stuff. It's a hallmark of a genius. Terrible naming conventions. But yeah, this pattern is like a constant one. A lot of 808s kind of have these like two lumps at the top and then a bit rounded. But yeah, that's a rabbit hole, like 808 shapes and that sort of thing. But I learned a lot by looking at it, so that's really helpful. All right, I'm going to show you this really dumb beat I made. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about sidechain with this. So somebody showed me Horse Girl with two eyes. Does anybody know? Okay, I don't know if you know them. Or I learned about them like 3 days ago, and the song, I thought it was hilarious, and I thought it'd be really funny to ruin it. So here's the song. Actually, no, I'll give you a little bit of the drop. It's pretty profane, so if I land on some naughty words, I apologize.
Repeat. Eat, sleep, slay, repeat. I said eat, sleep, slay, repeat. I said eat, sleep, slay, eat, sleep, slay, repeat. Eat, sleep, slay, repeat.
So that was like an hour or two session of just me being a complete idiot. I just thought it would be funny to take this really goofy song and add like the most aggressive tear out D&B drop to it. So I went and did that. I probably will never play this to anyone again, to be honest. But what I started doing when I was like visualizing stuff a lot more is I started printing audio and looking at it and just seeing what it looked like. I'll see if this is visible in this sidechain, but okay, so printed some audio there. What I noticed, the songs that I liked in terms of bass music, stuff that was like really dynamic and punchy, was the sidechain was like visible. You can see like the spots where it's like all snare and then, oh gosh, hotkeys. You can see there's like all snare here and then the bass comes in. There's like no overlap, but well, there's like a tiny little crossover, but it's like really distinct, like virtually silence when all of the like, when the drums come in, and then it's just like a big wall of sound outside of that. So I started thinking like, well, how do I do that? Because I've been using like compressor for ages, and you know, no beef with Ableton compressor. It actually sounds really good, and I think you've got a bit of fluidity with like the sounds you can feed into it. It's actually responsive. But I, for a while, literally just started like drawing automation holes for my sidechain because I was like, this is the perfect way to do it. Like I've got to cut this hole and have this same hole every time for my kick and snare. And then I was like, surely, back then there actually weren't any good plugins to do it. I was using Shaperbox and I had to like set up a MIDI trigger and stuff, and that was sick. It sounded good, but it was really annoying to use. I had to like draw the points in and then like have a separate track. It was annoying. So I started looking for tools. Unfortunately, in the last few years, some really good tools have come out. I'm going to throw my sidechain hat in the ring. I know Homemade Spaceship talked about was it GM Audio? That one honestly looks very similar to what I use, which is Kickstart, so I'm not going to like do a head-to-head comparison. I feel like if you find a plugin that cuts good holes, just use it. But I'm a big fan of this plugin. Also, it's made by Nicky Romero, so you know it's good. Nicky Romero. No, I actually have no opinion on Nicky Romero, to be honest. But it gives you a lot of visual feedback. So what I'm looking for when I sidechain stuff is to be able to see the length of my kick and to see the thing that I'm applying the sidechain to and basically measure the relationship between those. So Kickstart 2, $15. The GM Audio one is $13. So if you want to save $2, damn. I mean, yeah. Inflation, yeah, we have to, yeah, if you compensate for inflation. Oh, okay. Kickstart 2 was 15 USD, so that would probably work out to be more expensive still. But it's Nicky Romero, so $2 for a Nicky Romero tag on there. But anyway, I'll show you what this does instead of talking so much. Oh gosh, that's because I rendered it. All right. Let me loop this. So this just goes, I'm like a very, like when I'm making bass music, I do like drums and then everything else is sidechained. It's like a really dumbed down way of thinking of it. And I think really the secret to good bass music is it has to sound dumb. Like it actually has to sound simplified and everything is obvious and in your face. So I put everything in a group aside from my drums and like some of my percussion. Pads maybe, or like a reverb send if you want to like do some layering, but honestly the more everything ducks when the kick and snare hits, the bigger those drums feel. But yeah, this is what it looks like. So in this case I'm kind of letting the kick overlap a bit. But effectively what I'm trying to do is cut this hole so that when the drums are at full volume, everything else is muted, and then the tails overlap, so they basically roughly maintain a constant volume. And then when you print it, obviously you can put like limiting on your master and distortion on your master or whatever to kind of like brick everything out if you really crave the brick. But yeah, you can see when I print the audio, it's just flat the whole time, which is good for bass music mostly. Use your ears too. If you try to make something flat and it makes it sound worse, obviously, listen. But 9 times out of 10, I like the brick. And the other thing I do, you'll see this little gap here before the transient. This makes the transient super audible. So the way I do that, if it doesn't, if for some reason there's like, I don't know, if there's delay in the project that like adds that little bit, don't worry about it. But what I do, I will apply my sidechain and I go to my drums and I delay them by like, it's like 4 milliseconds or something like that. And you'll see the difference if I print this audio again without the delay. That's pretty forgivable, that's fine. But for that little extra sauce, if I add the tiniest bit of delay to my drums, I get this silence before the transients that just makes it like pop. Like you're getting full silence, like the sound gets the chance to like fully go down to 0, and then the next thing you hear is the drum transient. So that can make it really punchy. But these are things that I would not have figured out if I didn't start printing audio and looking at it. So again, like a W for just like looking at sounds. So that is quite fun. I like doing that. Let's have a look. I forgot.
How do you add the delay again?
How did I add the delay?
Yeah.
So I've done that on my drum group. And generally, like, you don't have to do this. Like, if you've got hi-hats and stuff as well, they can stay wherever they got to. But I guess the idea is, like, it's a minimal amount of delay, so it's not going to matter if everything isn't, like, perfectly aligned. But putting on the drum group, I'm literally pushing my kick, my snare, and all the hi-hats and everything forward by that same amount. So everything is, like, staying in rhythm, like...
that space over there to, like, breathe, no?
Yeah, exactly.
Or you could just move all the MIDI notes to nudge them, right? And essentially have the same effect.
Well, the downfall of that is it pushes the sidechain forward as well. So if you just delay the sounds as the sidechain is hearing it, then the sidechain will trigger later as well. So you're just moving the whole with the drums. But the trick is basically I'm feeding the sidechain my pre-effects audio, or basically anywhere before the delay, that's what the sidechain has to hear. So in this case, I was pretty dopey with this. I just put my kick and snare in the same track because they were already kind of made. I tend to, if I like sounds, I'll just print them and save them so they're kind of like ready to go. But the sidechain is coming out of this track. This is what the sidechain is hearing, and then the delay is happening after that. So it's in this group. So basically the sidechain hears it and goes, oh, okay, I'm going to make a hole. And then like after that, I'm delaying the drums to like arrive to that hole late, if that makes sense.
Your sidechain, like the actual kick's not like a dummy kick track.
No, it's so Kickstart is audio triggered, which is the big reason I like it over Shaperbox. It's by the same people as Cable Guys, so the interface looks very similar. You don't have to draw points in, which at first I was like, customization, but like you don't really need it with Sidechain. You're cutting a hole and there's 16 options. Like I'm sure one of those will work just fine. This is actually a surprisingly good sounding one, the hard cut. For bass music, I recommend trying it. But yeah, any of these shapes is going to be good enough to cut a good sidechain hole and, you know, like match it to the tail of your kick and snare or whatever. But it's audio triggered. You do have these modes, so when you load it up, it's usually in sync mode. So that's like, you know, if you're Nicky Romero and you're making house music, that's great because it'll just be like on the same, you know, on the 1, 2, 3, 4 every time. But if you want it to be like reactive to your drums and you want to be able to like do different drum patterns and stuff, do audio trigger, and then it's literally just going to trigger this volume envelope anytime it hears your drums. So it's way quicker because you can literally just like whack your drums and wherever. I can move this snare to wherever I want and the sidechain will move with it. You can hear that ducking is still happening. Like I can put a million kicks in and you will hear that ducking every time. Let's do an awkward length like that. It's just triggering that sidechain every single time. So super neat. Sidechain got better since I started making music. It used to suck. But yeah, print your sounds. Really recommend that. Cool. So distortion. Sidechain. Okay, I'm gonna do some more bass design stuff. I'm gonna start a new project for this. I make huge messes when I do sound design. Actually, I'll show you the sound design. I have terrible project names as well. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I'm a big believer in making a mess when you're creating stuff. I have a philosophy that to make anything good, you have to make a mess first. I mean, my sound design is really indicative of that. I'll open a project and just like clone sounds and record stuff. My hard drive is clogged with random sounds, but it's also fun because Ableton has search features, so I can just go and like look through all the random shit I've made. But this is what a sound design looks like, a sound design session looks like. It's just heaps and heaps of weird printed audio, and a lot of it is terrible. Some of it is cool. Cool. Blips. Let's see what this is. But I wanted to cover some other sound design concepts. And again, if you want to stop me and get me to explain something more in depth, or if I explain something weird, feel free to. If this feels like bewildering and weird, don't worry about it. Just try the sounds, see how they feel. But I don't know if any of you have heard of the drum and bass producer Simula. Simula, yeah, it's like 1 or 2 people. I have gained an adoration for him recently. I feel like he's a really good producer, but he puts these really dumb sounds in his tracks, and it's kind of tasteful, but it makes me laugh. Like I genuinely listen to his songs and laugh. This is a really good example. There's another one that has like a better example of this. Actually, maybe it is. No, it's not Bonesaw. Is it Bonesaw? Maybe it is. There's a particular sound that every time I hear it, I think it's hilarious. Alright, I'm waiting for this this one. So I feel like, I don't know if he's intentionally doing this, but anyone who's like a bass music producer probably hear these sounds and figure it out, be like, oh, I know what that sound is, that's this. And there's almost something kind of punk about the fact that he's using these really dumb sounds in his tracks. He's definitely a good producer. Like his mix down's pristine, his drum production is so tasteful, but then he puts these sounds in there and I'm like, what are you doing? But it's so cool. But that particular sound kind of got me thinking, because I'm like, that's definitely just like some really basic sound with a ring mod on it. And I figured that out because I'm really smart. Sorry, I make these really sarcastic, opposite of self-deprecating jokes a lot. But I think just from playing with plugins a lot, I can just hear certain sounds and be like, oh, that's probably that plugin. And that's not like a knowledge thing. Like I'm not breaking that down with any particular math. It's just from playing with sounds for long enough that I have a memory of certain sounds. So I'm going to try and emulate this this similar bass and see how we go with sound, ideally. Cool. All right, I'm just going to make this plain old.
Which sound
What?
was it? Was it like the
Yeah, hang on, I'll play it again. Yeah. So yeah, I'll show you what's happening with that sound. Okay. Bit of resonance. Actually, I'll just put the ring mod on first so you can hear like kind of... See how I kind of arrived at that. I'm using the kilohertz ring mod. I can totally use Shifter for this part of it. Shifter has a ring mod in it as well, but the kilohertz one has a sidechain input, which I'm going to use. It would be sick if Ableton added sidechain input to the Shifter. That would be really useful. Okay, so I just added this ring mod, and I've just got this basic square with a low pass on it, and I'm going to envelope it. So just crank the envelope up here, and okay, I'll turn it on a second. Oop. Okay, if I throw this ring mod on, you can hear this weird like vowel-y thing happening. So to explain what a ring mod does, it's basically the same as like a volume LFO, but it's really fast. So what it's doing to this sound, there's a little extra step to ring mod specifically as opposed to like AM, but basically you can see this shape here. What it's doing is it's applying a 900 hertz volume LFO to this sound, and it's adding this ringing. If I do this to a sine wave, you can actually see it. Oops. And my oscilloscope. Hotkeys are not working. Okay. I'll just put this on a sine wave for now. So you can see it's just like adding this ringing to the top. And if I do that mix, if I do it all the way, literally you can see that it's volume modulating this sine wave underneath, like full length. So you've got this like overlaid frequency over the top of the input signal that's just filling up the entire volume now. Intermodulation, that's what I was going to talk about. So I like totally lost my train of thought for a sec. So I'm going to try and explain what's happening here with this particular sound, and if it doesn't make sense, don't worry about it. It's just extra brain candy. But I'll show you on a Spectrum. Actually, no, I'm going to use Span. Let's plug Span. Span. Cool. So if I just tune this to the sine wave we've got, so let's do like 100 hertz. This is set the ring mod to 100 hertz, and then let's set this fixed frequency to 100 hertz as well. If we get this right, that's right. Did I do this right? I think it's literally phasing. Oh no, it's my envelope, that's what it is. Absolute fool. Cool. Okay, so if I tune these to the same note, theoretically, we should just get cancellation at some point if they're not perfectly aligned. But what we're doing is we've got a sine wave playing, and then we've got a volume envelope that is matching that exact pattern, and when it drifts out of phase, it's just going to cancel it out. So you can see there's a little bit of like volume change in there. Ooh, there we go. But it's pretty much on point. If I start to change this frequency, what's this guy down here doing? This frequency just appears. That is called intermodulation, and it is basically the mathematical relationship between two frequencies. So a good way to explain this, if I play a polyrhythm, so I'll do I think it's a 2-3, I don't know, so if I play 1, 2, 1, 2 in my left hand, and then 3 in my right hand, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If I play those together, 1, 2, oh. See, I've got 2 patterns playing, but there's also a third thing happening, which is when both my hands land, that's these 2 patterns going in phase. That's a third frequency, is the best way to look at that. So that third pattern is intermodulation. So that's a really simple example, but basically when you combine 2 frequencies and they are different lengths apart, you get a crazy extra pattern that comes in. So you start hearing this extra frequency, and you'll see as I move this frequency, this other weird frequency has its own relationship. I haven't really like crunched the numbers on exactly what pattern is happening here, but you get the idea. You're getting these extra frequencies just from the relationship between 2 original frequencies. So in this case, with this bass, what's happening is I'm adding this like resonant frequency, and then when I move this like peak in the filter with the envelope that I turned off, it's these intermodulary, if that's the real word for it, frequencies appearing and moving around that are creating that weird sound. Sorry, that's super loud. All right. Actually, I'll turn the envelope off for a sec so we can see. That's like that's the ring mod there, and then here's these like weird frequencies stemming off of that ring. But that's fun. So I'm not gonna try and explain too much more shit, but I'll just do some stuff that I would normally do to sounds, and we'll see if it sounds cool. Yeah.
So when do you use that to your advantage, like the interfrequency modulation? Would you like use that as a tool, or are you trying to get rid of that, or what are you doing?
Personally, I like that sound. In this case, I wouldn't say it's like knowing this isn't necessarily like helping me produce better. It's just like stuff that I think about while it's happening. So like in that case, because I like think about that when I hear that sound, anytime I hear another producer like do that, like when I heard that similar bass, I think thinking about that sound and just like learning that extra bit about it helped it stick in my brain. So like I said, if like me explaining this doesn't like add any value to it for you, then that's fine. It's whatever is just gonna like make you think about a sound, I guess. Yeah, it has a similar effect. Yeah, exactly. Because the formant filter is like peaks, and in this case, those peaks are in like the vocal range. That's what gives it that like yo 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 sound. But yeah, you can do that with a formant filter. I like the ring mod sound because it's directly related to the signal going into it. It has like a cohesive sound to it. But yeah. All right, so let's see if we can work on this sound. I don't know if I would ever actually use a sound in this format. I feel like it's super goofy, but it's a good starting block. So another tool I wanted to talk about that I use a lot nowadays is the wavefolder. Yeah, I'm glad you're enthusiastic about the wavefolder. I'm enthusiastic about it. So this is a weird form of distortion. To kind of quickly glaze over, normal distortion, there's like a ceiling basically that you're driving sounds into. And if you look at any like really sausaged waveform, you can see stuff hitting the ceiling and going flat. The wavefolder is different. What happens is when you drive sounds into it, instead of clipping the top off of it, it looks at what's going over that threshold and inverts it. So it starts folding sounds back down. I'll do the sine wave thing again just so you can see what's happening. But and turn that ring mod off. So let's feed a sine wave into this, and you'll see once it gets to a certain volume, it starts to fold the top of it back down. Just makes it a bit more visible. If I drive it far enough, it's going to be a bit tricky for the oscilloscope to track it, but if I push it far enough, that peak gets folded so far down that it hits the bottom ceiling, because sound is basically, you've got a positive and negative pole. It folds it so far down that it hits the other ceiling and folds it back up again. So basically, what you start with is one waveform, and basically you squeeze it so it becomes 3 and then 5, and then you're squeezing so much like frequency into this small space that it just becomes higher and higher frequency content. So I'll show you what happens when we do that. Eventually it just turns to white noise. And there's some stuff with curvature in there that makes it white noise. If I feed like a triangle into it, you'll get a different result. And if I feed a square into it, it'll sound really weird. And it's all to do with how it's interacting with that like series of folds. But the short reason is I like the white noise. I use the white noise a lot in my sound design. It's also really good for making 808s. We were talking about that shape before. You'll notice if I just drive that a tiny bit from a sine wave, I've basically got what looks like a lot of my favorite 808s. It's that little like, you know, two humps, like camelback looking thing. So I use wavefolders for, am I at the lowest point of the register? Oh no, I've got a fixed frequency, that's why. Cool. I've got a pretty good bass just by adding one plugin and driving it a little bit. So I like to use wavefolders for that, but it's really fun for adding noise. So what I do, crank it. Obviously, because there's like a really mathematical loop to this sound, you can hear a digital loop sound to it. If you get like an 808 sample or something like that, it tends to sound really nice and juicy. It's not like as digital and looped, but for example's sake, it doesn't really matter. So what I like to do...
Can we hear that on an 808 real quick?
Yeah, for sure. I'm glad you asked.
Curious to see what that's gonna sound
I would love to show you what this sounds like on an 808. Okay, let's do my... yeah, I'll do C. This one. Cool. Okay, that's the lowest possible sample. Okay. So it's much cleaner. It doesn't sound like grindy. It's like... and also, if I crank up the release time, you can hear this like tail. And that's it basically going the opposite way with those folds. It's because as it's getting quieter, those folds are getting less and less, and you're getting like lower frequency content. So it's really fun for making like weird tails. So that's fun to have some little tails. And if you throw OTT or something like that on it, you're going to get a whole bunch of cool shit.
Yeah, short little glitch effects and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, sending blips into a wave folder can be really interesting. But yeah, it's definitely good for white noise. It sounds much more organic, I think, than just like layering white noise. But I'll show you the extra step I do for making noise bases, like you heard in some of the stuff I showed you. So here's this noise we just generated. What I'm going to do is just let the bass back in, like that. And I might like balance the two, and then I'll use another wave folder. So I'll clone this one. And I'll just reset the settings on this new instance. So it's just going in dry. So this is the first one, making the noise and letting the bass through. This plugin has a symmetry knob. And basically what this is, there's a few plugins that have this if you use Dynamic Tube. The bias knob is the same thing. What it's doing with the positive and negative poles of the sound, instead of like clipping the whole thing evenly, it's just squashing one side. So you basically are hearing this oscillation hit this ceiling half the amount of times than it normally would with like normal distortion. And how that sounds is like this. You get this like buzzing as opposed to normal sounding distortion. And I really like that buzzing sound. So I kind of crank it till, like, usually you can see it, which is kind of handy. Actually, it'd be probably better if I turn this up a bit. Cool. I just crank that symmetry until it's really struggling with the tracking on this. It's hard to see, but basically you can see one side, the ceiling starts to get shaved off, and that's like kind of the sweet spot. So I've made this like really audio reactive white noise. No matter what I play, that note is going to stay like in sync. That white noise is like really tuned. And then what I do is I just box that in with a filter. So that's my white noise layer. And I can do whatever I want to that, and it won't affect the normal bass. So let's do that. Actually, I won't bother with a low pass. It's overcomplicating it. But there's my noise layer. And then I just let a dry layer through. So I add a chain to this effect rack, and it's just sub. And I love that sound. I personally think that's like super useful. Bass music is a lot of filling the spectrum with noise, like as much like content as possible. Noise is like a really good tool for making things feel intense. So noise is good. Noise bases are super useful. But I like doing that. Let's see, how are we going for time? Cool. So this introduces another concept which I really like with sound design, which is chain splitting. So what I've done is I've created a layer that fills out an area of the spectrum with my sound. And I'll show you, let's just get Spain up. But I'm using this noise to fill out this top area, and I've got my sub is already like filling out this bottom area. But if I want to make an interesting sound, I can basically add layers that fill in every part of the spectrum. So I'm going to add another parallel chain and basically add some mid-range harmonics to this. I'm going to use the wavefolder for this because it's fun, but let's just isolate this. So I'm going to go ahead and just treat this like I'm distorting a normal bass, but I'm going to use it just the mid-range of this. So let's get that. All right. So I've kind of got some like honky mid-range content in there. Maybe let's add our good friend frequency shifter in there just for some like cool movement. And you know what, just for fun, I'm going to add in maybe one more distortion of some sort. Sorry. Cool, and then what I'll do, since I've already got bass and I've already got treble, I'm just going to put this auto filter on it and box it in. So I'm going to cut out the bass portion of it, and I'm going to cut out the treble portion of it, so I get this mid-rangey bit. If I combine that with my sub and my noise, it sums together to be a pretty cohesive sound. And you can do a lot to individual bands, and because it's the same sound going into all of the different bands, it generally stays somewhat cohesive. So I like to do it this way because the other benefit to this is that if I have a really good sounding sub, and I don't want to destroy it with a bunch of processing, I can do all of my tone adding in some other chain or some other band and leave my sub as juicy and as fat as it is. And that's why I like starting with 808s as well, because 808s are basically just like deluxe subs. You know, they're just like sub but better. So yeah, chain splitting goes pretty hard. And then it never hurts to throw OTT on something. The one thing I will say is it does sometimes hurt your sub. So I want to go back on my word there and say, if I really want to distort a sound and I feel like I'm losing bottom end, you can turn it up on here, but if you're not a fan of the compression on your bottom end, you can chain split again. So I might just like do OTT, so there's like a chunk of the sound that's all squashed and nasty sounding, and then just let a clean sub through. So low pass that. Cool, there's my sub, and then I'll just clone this filter onto this like top end, and I can distort this and do as much nasty shit to it as I want, and it won't ruin the sub. So I like doing that. Another thing that I like to do with my sounds, I like to throw tube on them. Tube is also, in my mind, notorious for destroying sub because, like with the wavefolder, it distorts one side more than the other. It can literally just suck all of the volume out of your bottom end because your sub is the thing that's giving it all of that like volume. And if you squash it, you're going to lose that. So if I do bias on this, like or do tube on this, you see it kind of just like squashes out and it's gone. But I like the top end tone of that. It's like kind of crunchy. So band split. What you do it to the whole sound, and then put your high pass on after the tube. So I'm getting that top end out of it, like this. And then just let the sub through dry. So I'm getting the like crunch of the tube without losing the meat of the sub, which is pretty thick. You know what, let's frequency shift this. I want to see what that sounds like. Sick. Ooh. Am I getting two? Oh, that's the pitch shift, yep. Yeah.
So, do you even have your drums in mind here? Because you're creating these monstrous sized basses that take so so much frequency spectrum up, right? I mean,
Yeah.
How do you like create room for like, because your music had all sorts of little kind of very interesting affectations. I can see if I were to do it, I'd just step all over that stuff.
For sure, yeah. I mean, so the way I get it to all slot together, the first one is the sidechain. So cutting those holes for your drums.
Sidechain going back there.
Sidechain is a big part of it for sure. Yeah, if you listen to a lot of bass music, a lot of the main basses are gonna, yeah, they're like full spectrum, like especially like bro step era, like Skrillex was all just like everything is just full spectrum noise, but the sidechain is so like aggressive that the drums cut through really well. That being said though, I do think having spaces for things in your mix is still something that's possible. What I do with my bass is, so I'll generate this like full spectrum brick, but when it comes to songwriting, I create movement throughout the spectrum as like a rhythmic element. So in this case, actually band splitting is kind of a good opportunity to do this. So I've got this bass, I think that's fine as is, but I've got a top end, a mid-range, and a bottom end. For the most part, I want the bottom end to follow a specific pattern and kind of be constant, so I don't tend to modulate the sub too much. But this top band and this mid band are things that I can volume modulate according to the rhythm of the song. So I don't think I have enough time to go into like making a huge mud pie, but just to give you an example, what I might do is I'll print a brick. And there's all kinds of ways you can do this. Filtering is another really good way to do this. But you can literally just modulate these bands. So I'll take my mid-range. Let's just do like some little stuff like this. Some random little movements. Oops. Yeah.
So sub's just staying consistent underneath all of it, and it's just the top and mid bands that are
Yeah.
wobbling.
Yeah, and this is like, yeah, it's perfect for rhythm, I think. And this is something that like I can make a mud pie, and it's fun to just like print audio. Like what I usually do in a session is I'll just make a bass and do a bunch of random stuff. Sometimes I'll just literally use LFO random, which is a really cool tool. Highly recommend. And that just generates like a random modulation, and I can just link it to whatever. And if I'm making mud pies, it kind of gives me more dopamine to just let it make itself. So I'll like link this sound like this, and it'll just move a bunch of stuff around. All right, let's speed this up. So like, so you can now hear the top end is moving around a bunch. You know, I might even do binary, so it's just up and down. But if you leave it in this form where it's like still in a rack form and you haven't like printed audio, then you can use the bands and the control of the bands to kind of work around your drums. I didn't really leave myself enough time to talk about it, but that's definitely a big part of my production. If I have like a drum loop, a lot like what Rob was saying yesterday about having everything relate, I write a lot of my like sound design rhythms around the drum rhythm. So I might have like a mid-range stab right after my kick. So the first one will be like some like mid-range thing, and then cut it out for different parts of the pattern and only bring it back in when the kick happens or something like that. But yeah, effectively, like all of these bands are now like rhythm elements in the same way that a drum kit is divided up into like different spots in the spectrum. Your snare has a spot, your bass has a spot, your hi-hats have a spot. You're creating rhythm by like moving to different parts of the spectrum. But yeah, just quickly, like, okay, if I turn this modulation off, delete this.
Maybe like 3-ish minutes.
Sweet, all right. You can also do this with filtering. So I've got my brick. I've turned it off. Oh my goodness. Cool. I've got this chain split here. I'm just going to use this. Let's go sub and top. One way I like to do this is I'll literally just use a filter. So my sub is still coming through clean, and then all this top end content, I just modulate that. And maybe I want that movement to just be in my mid-range. So that's doing its own thing. So I'll just call that mid. And then I want the top end to stay clean, so I'll turn that filter off and just let the top end through. Or maybe I want more movement in the top as well, so I'll have another band pass on the top end, moving independently, a different rate, let's say. But these are all basically rhythm elements, if anything. So you can move all that stuff around and have all this like stimulation, and I really feel like the most dynamic sounding tunes have change that is really visible across the spectrum. So you have a moment where you focus on the mid-range, you have a moment where you focus on the top end, and like, yeah, the more you're moving around, the more kind of like exciting it sounds. Yeah.
When you're like modulating the top and the mid separately, are you worried about syncing them? So one's 16th notes, one's 8th notes roughly, or does it not matter at all? Are you worried about phase issues between those two bands?
I'm not too worried about phase issues as such, because I mean the only band that I worry about with phase is the sub. I think the mid-range and high-range content is so like quiet in comparison. Like it's audibly louder, but you're not gonna it's not gonna cancel as easily, I guess. Whereas your sub frequencies, they're such big frequencies that like overlaying two of them, they're just gonna like get a whole bunch of mess. But yeah, in terms of like keeping them in sync, it's all dependent on the context. But yeah, generally I like to have some level of relation. So it's good to have tools where you can control the rate. So rather than using an auto filter, you could use like a shaper.
Oh, turn it to the note instead of the hertz rate,
You mean
on the auto filter.
to the note? You mean
On the LFO and the auto filter. Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. Oh yeah, as in yeah, like tempo sync. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that'd be one way to do it. And yeah, you can also use a tool like Shaper if you want to kind of control your rhythm a little bit more. So I can actually just draw in like I want, the treble to peak at, at this point and then mute here, rather than just being like it's just a sine wave. I can really like draw it in. Or you can do it with automation, or there's tools like Shaper Box, which I'm a big fan of for that. But yeah, I think ultimately it's going to be easiest to make those decisions when it comes to writing the song. So option A, which is really fun, is just to print mud pies. So modulate a bunch of random parameters and make a bunch of cool sounds, let it move around. Like I've just got a whole bunch of weird, crazy weird sounds here. Lots of OTT. I didn't get into spectral time or like filtering and that sort of thing. So if anybody wants to dig deeper into that, you can just hit me up later. But yeah, option A, print a mud pie, and then when you're writing, what you can do is like, say this is my first beat. I just like loop the first beat and then like try different spots of the bass. So like, I can just try different notes and see what sounds cool. And then obviously you can control the rhythm that way. And then honestly, once you've got one bar that sounds good, you can pretty much make a whole song out of it. And then option B is to leave your bass in rack form, and then you can manually be like, okay, I want to hear mid-range here, I want to mute it here, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Just for anyone that might not know that key command to be able to scroll through audio, because I did not know that for the longest time.
Mm.
You do know what
So I hold, it's the 3 keys, which is pretty wild, but it's Command Alt Shift or Control Alt Shift if you're in Windows. That gives you the fine tuning. I think if you let go of Alt, it just, wait, is it Alt? I just always do Command Alt Shift for that. No, wait, let me just, yeah.
I guess if you let go of
It's just
command
Alt
and
Shift.
hit it,
Yeah.
hold down command and it like
Right. So it's Alt Shift is the hotkey, and then Command gives you the fine tuning. And I almost always want the fine tuning, so it's kind of nice just to be able to slide it like that. I will say it's going to be dependent on how much sound is in there to scrub through. So obviously, if I'm at the end of it, it's not going to let me scroll any further. So once I get to that, I can't drag any further. And this happens to me a lot where I like drop a sound in and it's like extended all the way to the end. And I'm here like trying to drag it. And I'm like, why didn't it go any further? And it's just because like you've extended the whole thing. So just like Command E is to slice. So you do that and then you can scrub through your slice. Yeah, cool. I feel like I've run out of time to monologue about sound, so thanks for having me. It was fun.